Thank you for joining me today. I appreciate you guys taking the time out of your day and being here to listen to my speech. Have you ever known someone who has had everything good taken away from them? Who has been broken to the core? Who has had family and friends ripped away from them? And then you've seen them rise from that challenge and that struggle and become a better, stronger, more courageous person. Ever since I was young, I was drawn to stories about drug abuse, divorce, addiction, just difficult life situations. The underdog story always got to me. I love seeing individuals overcoming all the odds and coming out on top. I also had a strong desire to learn about different cultures and people and situations. For this reason, I was drawn to learning about this specific individual. This person overcame tremendous life-threatening situations. She survived. She survived. She's forgiven those who've hurt her. And she's moving forward and helping the world become a better place by advocating. This individual is Nadia Murad. I do not know Nadia personally. However, I was intrigued by her powerful story. She's a Nobel Peace Prize winner. I would like to share parts of her story with you guys. I will discuss with you her childhood, the terrorist attack on her village, her being kidnapped, beaten, and sexually abused, her attempted and successful escapes, her reunion with her family, and then her advocating against ISIS today. So let me take you 7,000 miles across the Atlantic Ocean to a small village named Kucho, which is in Iraq. This village is populated by poor farmers. Nadia grew up here and she was raised Yazidi. Yazidi is a religion that is very rare. It's also a religion that, from the religious leaders, the religion is passed down verbally. There's no book of scripture. So they have generations and generations of their leaders sharing these stories with the people. Nadia, she comes from a very large family. She's the youngest of 11. So she had to many times make her voice heard and speak up. You know, can you imagine being in a family of 11? You gotta speak up when you need to. Now, because they were living in Iraq, her family was very weary of the constant unrest and fighting that was going on in their country. According to Britannica.com, Yazidis had often been singled out and persecuted. ISIS targeted Yazidis because they used religion as a justification for abuse. ISIS did not see their religion as a real religion because they didn't have a book of scripture. So that being the case, ISIS attacked her village. They started small. They would just kind of do little things like steal cattle or sheep or pigs or whatever. And then they took it to another level and they actually kidnapped 2 farmers. And then they demanded a ransom for the safe return of these farmers. In her book, The Last Girl, Nadia, she was outside her home and the terrorists were actually driving her in her village. And they were doing just little things to like intimidate and, you know, cause trauma to this village. And Nadia actually went out and ran after this truck and yelled at these people, these men with guns and that have they'll kill you in a heartbeat, they don't care. And she yelled at them and she says, "Bring back our farmers." And her family like chased after her and they're like, "Nadia, you can't do this, go back in the house." And she was just so mad, but I love this story because she had the power to use her voice. And she knew something was wrong and she wasn't afraid to speak up. However, 2 days later, ISIS did take over Kucho. The day they took over, ISIS separated the men and the women and children. The men, they told that they were going to go to a refugee camp. That was not the case. They actually drove them just a short distance and lined them up behind a school and mass murdered them. According to NobelPeacePrize.org, Yazidis experienced genocide and annihilation of their community. Their families, their homes, and their dreams were all destroyed. At this point, the fate of Nadia, she didn't know what her future held. The young girls and women were loaded onto buses, and they were going to be taken to the city of Mosul, which is the ISIS stronghold. and they were going to be marketed as sex slaves. So on this bus ride, there was a terrorist that was just walking up and down the aisle, and as he walked up and down the aisle, he touched, he groped, he was very aggressive with the women on the bus. And Nadia was one of these women, and at one point, she stood up. She told him to stop it. Just stop touching me and the other women on this bus. And it didn't go well for her. She actually got in big trouble. And the man said to her, "What do you think you're here for?" But it goes back to her courage. Again, like in such a difficult situation. Her life was at stake, and she had the courage to stand up and use her voice for herself and for the other women that were in that situation. So when they got to Mosul, she was sold to a high-ranking judge. And this high-ranking judge said that she was his wife. So he made her dress up fancy when he had guests, and he made her cook and clean and do all the things that a wife should do for him. And when she wasn't doing these things, she was locked up in her room. This judge would repeatedly rape her and beat her. Didn't matter if there was a reason to or not. That's just how she was treated. There was a night where this judge was having a party and all the high-ranking officials were coming to his home. And Nadia noticed that the guards weren't at their regular post. And she's like, "Oh my gosh, if I'm gonna escape, now is the time that I'm gonna do it." And so she's in her room, she opens her window, she climbs out the window, and she's putting her foot on the roof, and she hears a man yell at her, "Hey, what are you doing?" And she knew at that point she was caught. So her punishment for attempted escape was to be beaten, gang raped, and then she was sold. Being sold means she was taken to a checkpoint. This checkpoint was ISIS controlled. People would come and go. Men would come. If they wanted to, they could rape her and then go on their way. She did have a possibility of being sold to somebody in Syria, which if she went to Syria, then her chance of escape went down dramatically. So she was terrified of that. Luckily, she was actually sold to somebody who lived in Mosul, so she was taken back to Mosul. At this time, Nadia had been very, very sick. She had been vomiting, she couldn't hold anything down, she's almost lethargic, and then here she is being taken with a new man to his home and having to readjust. So this man treated her just like all the rest. He beat her, raped her. At one point he did leave the home, he had things to get done, and Nadia was there trying to recover, and she just had the thought, she's like, "Did he lock the front door?" And so she goes and checks, and he did not. So she did not think, she just acted, she grabbed her stuff, and she walked out the door. She didn't run because she didn't want to draw attention to herself. So she walked. So here she is walking in the city of Mosul, and she's like, "Where can I go for safety? Where can I go where someone will have compassion for me?" She didn't want to knock on somebody's door where they were ISIS, supportive of ISIS, and then get her back into the exact same situation that she came from. She walked up to one house and she raised her arm to knock on the door, and she just was like, "This isn't the house." And she kept walking. And she went to a quieter area of Mosul, and it was there where she felt prompted to go to a home, knock on the door, and there was a family there that helped her escape. So Nadia shares in her book, The Last Girl, after she escaped, she was reunited with her family. At this time, she found out what happened to many of her family members. Her mom had been murdered. 6 of her brothers had been murdered. She had a nephew that actually joined ISIS, which was heartbreaking for Nadia. In an interview with BBC Hard Talk, Nadia said, since being reunited with her family, she's been very busy. She's actively fighting for the rights of her people. She's advocating in America, in Britain, in Europe. Anywhere that will hear her, she's out there advocating and sharing her story. She's met members of parliament and she's met world leaders. According to Nadia's initiative.org, she is dedicated to rebuilding communities that have been destroyed, and she's advocating globally for survivors of sexual violence and advocating to rebuild Cucho, as well as seeking justice for Yazidi people. She's often heard saying, "I want to be the last girl in the world with a story like mine." So after listening to Nadia's story, I hope you have a better understanding of her childhood, of the terrorist attack on her village, her story of being kidnapped, sexually abused, her escape, her reunification with her family, and her desire to be an advocate. Nadia has endured unthinkable acts of violence at the hands of ISIS. She did not let these evil men break her soul or her voice. She's courageous, she's strong, she survived. I also hope she's the last girl in the world with a story like hers. Thank you.